Hi, everybody. Let's get started. Welcome to Broomfield Conversation. My name's Peggy Reed, and Broomfield Conversation is a new virtual set of events to help people of Broomfield learn about Broomfield. We're also going to learn about the 2020 ballot initiatives and candidates for state offices for the election in November. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Chief Krieger began his law enforcement career with the Arvada Police Department, where he served for 32 years. He received a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from UNC and a master's degree in administration of justice and security from the University of Phoenix. Chief Krieger is a 2005 graduate of the FBI Academy and a 2010 graduate of Leadership and Police Organization. He was appointed our Chief of Police in December of 2014. He also serves as the ex officio Sheriff of Broomfield County and assumes management responsibilities for traditional police services, as well as the County Detention Center, emergency management, and other county-related responsibilities. Welcome, Chief Krieger. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here with everybody. I didn't know if you wanted to go straight into questions and answers. I can tell you a little bit about the Broomfield Police Department in the City and County of Broomfield, if you would like to start. As you saw, I'm actually technically a police chief. I am not a sheriff, but I assume the sheriff's responsibilities, and those are defined in state law, includes running a detention center, court security. We have responsibility for service of civil papers, those kinds of things. Broomfield's kind of the biggest medium-sized city you're going to find throughout the country, just simply because we have all the things a big city has. We have major concert venues, we have large-scale employers, we have 5 major highways that run through the city. We have municipal policing, county responsibilities, we run emergency management, and so it's quite a diverse and complex little city for a city of its size. And but it's a lot of fun, and because it's all combined under one government, really makes its opportunities to make adjustments or adopt new programs really quite easy. So for example, several years ago, with in collaboration with our Health and Human Services department, we really upped our mental health capacity for our community, including building a co-responder program where mental health professionals respond out with officers to address issues with mental health. And we can talk more about that if you have an interest in that. But it makes it just so much easier to get through competing interests that often happen where you have different governments overseeing the same things or pieces of the same things. We can make those adjustments very, very quickly. So Peggy, I'll turn this over to you, and if you want to move to question and answers, or if there's any particular topics you want to talk about.
Well, thanks. So these are just basic questions, like how many police officers do we have, and how is the department organized?
So the overall department is about 241 people. That includes 181 officers. The department is, and that's authorized. The department is divided in half, and each half is overseen by a deputy chief of police. One is operations, which would be what you'd normally think of as municipal policing. They're officers you see in the community and on the road every day. There's about 110 of those for 70,000 people. The other officers, about 60-ish, is detention officers. They work pretty much only in the jail. They do some court security. We're required to transport people to courts throughout the metro area, actually throughout the state. And periodically we have to go out of state and bring people that are wanted in Broomfield from all over the United States. So that's kind of the generalized breakdown. We do, one deputy chief has dispatch, in addition to the detention center, the court security, those kinds of things. The other one has patrol, investigations, traffic. We do have a mall unit when the mall is open for security out at the mall. So that's kind of the generalized breakdown.
Can you say a little bit about how policing has changed since you got started?
Oh boy, that's a lot of change over the years. And you know, I think what you saw coming when I started in the early 80s in policing was a very traditional policing model. And it's what was part of the time frame, which they called the professionalization of policing. Policing was just starting to use radios instead of call boxes. They were, it was more about being in the car, not a lot of community interaction, except for if they needed the police. Some of you may remember, I'm going to be showing my age, but the old show about the FBI where it was just the facts, ma'am. That was kind of the approach of policing. And then as we moved into the 90s, and you really saw a change in policing to be more engaging in the community. It was really important for the police to get out, to get known by the community. You know, that's kind of post-Columbine is where you saw school resources officers in the school, not just to enforce laws in the school, but more importantly, to engage kids in the schools and engage kids at an early age. So that you were really trying to blend the police as really just being a part of the community instead of sort of a separate entity from the community. That kind of got derailed post 9/11, and quite honestly, a lot to the dismay of many of us, because people were afraid post 9/11. And you saw this militarization of the police post 9/11 because of the fear of future attacks. I think that was a huge mistake. And what we've tried to do in some places with more success than others is get back to that community policing model. Now I tell you that Broomfield's never lost its touch with, Broomfield PD has never lost its touch with its community, never went to those huge swings in philosophical approach or ideological approach to policing. It's always been very tied to its community, which I think is one of the major accomplishments of the Broomfield Police Department.
Thanks. I got this question from, I solicited questions and I got one that I thought was pretty interesting. It was about graffiti removal. And it was about, I've asked for some graffiti to be removed in my neighborhood. And where that led me was about priorities. So I'm guessing that you have a large number of requests and they sort of vary in severity and priority. So if I call you and I say something about graffiti in my neighborhood, how do you deal with kind of the range of things you're asked to do?
Sure. So when a call comes into dispatch for service, the dispatcher will get a lot of information about what that call is. They rank the call in a list of 1 to 5 priorities. Obviously, priority 1 is immediate. The officers are going, even if we have to clear them off other calls, that is somebody's life is in danger or they're in danger of getting hurt. So priority 1 and priority 2 are automatic, immediate dispatch. 3, 4, and 5 will be descending in order. And I tell people, you know, a lot of times during the day, we actually have more people that are asking for our resources than we have to give. Broomfield Police Department, when I came here in 2014, in my opinion, was severely understaffed. It had just come out of the Great Recession. Nobody had been, no positions had been added to the police department since 2006, when it was 49,000. It was pushing 70,000 at the time. And so it really needed to be re-energized with additional people to provide the level of service Broomfield residents wanted. So with the assistance of council, we have grown the police department and continue to do so today. We're down about 20 positions, all of those on that operations side. Luckily, with some of the closures due to COVID, we could shift some resources. It takes about a year to 16 months from the time we have an opening to the time we can hire and train an officer to replace that. So it's a big undertaking to hire and train an officer. So so it's all done by priorities. Certain times of the day where there's not as much going on, we respond to lower level priorities pretty quickly. Generally, our response time to non-priority calls is around 10 minutes. But for priority calls, it's under 4 minutes. So you get almost immediate response to priority calls.
That was very interesting answer. I'm going to turn based on what you told me. So what makes a successful police officer? Y'all are in the news a lot these days, and it really begs the question in terms of, how do you hire people that will be successful police officers?
That's a great question. So, it's going to vary by city to city, because each city determines, or hopefully determines, what it wants from its policing and its police officers. And when we hire police officers, we're not the most busiest police department you're going to find in the country, but we're busy. If we'll often see people that want that high action, high excitement type of policing, and we tell them, go somewhere else. You're not going to be happy with Broomfield. What we really look for is as an officer that wants to engage the community. They want to take time to solve problems. They want to treat people well. They don't want to just get in, get out, get their job done, but rather have a commitment of service to the community. So when we go to hire officers, only 1 in 12 that apply will we actually hire. And a lot of times we'll see people that we won't hire that go on to be very successful police officers in other communities. They just aren't going to do it here. So it's really about defining what the police officer should look like in a particular city, and that has to be done with meeting the expectations of the community.
So what are the attributes of a good officer working for you?
Service-oriented, somebody that is committed to providing the best, highest quality service they can to an officer. We want somebody that is patient and is willing to take the time to talk with people. We teach what's called a LEAD model. It comes out of the President's Commission on 21st Century Policing that was passed under President Obama. And it stands for listen and explain with equity and dignity. So we're not going to just tell you you're under arrest. We're going to tell you you're under arrest. We're going to tell you why you're under arrest. We're going to explain what's going to happen to you and do everything in our power to make this as non-confrontational and with the least amount of resistance on either side as we possibly can. So we want somebody that is willing to engage their community, take the time to explain to people, wants to treat people correctly with dignity, and somebody who is really committed to the community they serve.
Okay. There's some other departments around in the US that haven't been quite as successful in that way. Can you speak to that? And I also kind of want to ask you a question next to that question, which is, are you optimistic or pessimistic based in the conversations that you're seeing about policing?
Sure. Well, as you travel around the country, and I have a lot, and working with other departments, you'll see a very marked difference in the philosophical approach to policing. The East Coast is steeped in tradition, much less progressive in its approach to policing, more old school. Whereas you get to the West Coast and you get more progression. I think Colorado probably has the best example of policing overall, as you'll find in the country. It's a progressive approach to policing, a commitment to finding new and better ways to deal with crime and different issues that are occurring in its community. So I think Colorado is one of the best models you'll find out there. I'm sorry, Peggy, what was the other part of that question?
Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the state of the policing in the country?
I'm actually quite optimistic. Policing, as we talked a little bit about, as changes over the years, unfortunately, a lot of times those changes occur because of major events or bad, deplorable events that have occurred around the country. But it has always evolved, and it's going to evolve again. And for the most part, I think that's quite optimistic about it. What we've seen over the last 20 years is the police were, when people didn't know what to do with a particular problem, it became the police's problem. And while we tried to prepare the officers for dealing with those issues, they were really social issues that were well beyond the police. They were going to take much more expertise. They were going to take more time than we could give it. Mental health is a prime example. 1 in 5 people in this country suffers from mental health problems. What I saw, and we did for years, was they'd call the police when somebody's in crisis. The police would show up. We would train them in understanding their mental health through CIT training and those. But at the end of the day, we weren't going to solve their problem. So we would have to get them into an ambulance, get them to the hospital, put them on a 72-hour hold, which the doctors generally medicated them and took the 72-hour mental health hold, sent them home. They got an ambulance bill and an emergency room visit bill for their trouble, stopped taking their medication, and we were back there in another day or two. And that just kept repeating itself over and over again. Whereas by using more mental health services, we still go to make sure the scene is safe. Everybody can be safe, and whether it be the person in crisis or the mental health worker that's going to come out. But the mental health worker can come in. We don't have to send them to the hospital. If they need medication, we can get it. We can connect them to all sorts of ongoing services, whether it be mental health, housing, food, workforce, any of those kinds of things. And then we don't have to keep going back, and we don't have to escalate the situation each time we're there like we did in the past. So I think that's just one example of where we can actually change the conversation and the expectations on policing by taking a hard look at what it is that we expect of policing and make good choices about maybe those are not the areas that they belong in. And the officers that we are hiring today will never know the difference. They'll come into policing with a new model, and that'll be their paradigm and not the constantly changing paradigm of old guys like me.
That's great. Gary Koenig, I think we've gotten a couple questions in the chat room. Could you go over those?
We have. First of all, a comment from Robbie. We listened to your presentation the night that you joined the city manager, mayor, police commanders, and others when you spoke about the PD and how the Broomfield Police Department is led and managed. We were impressed with your progressive style and leadership. Thank you for your service. I think we probably all join in thanking you for your service.
Thank you.
Here's a question from Ian. How does CCOB provide for police officers injured on the job?
And CCOB is the City Council of Broomfield, for those of you who aren't up on all the abbreviations.
Sure. So officers injured in the line of duty, they have obviously health care that comes along with their job. They also are covered under workers' comp. If they need any kind of specialized support, we often find that sometimes they have troubles with their mental health just simply because of what they've seen and had to do. We keep a staff psychologist on retainer. She specializes in trauma care for police officers. We have peer support, which are specially trained employees that talk with officers, can relate with officers. We have chaplain programs available. And then we have a really strong relationship with the Broomfield Rotary, who has a fund to help offset any non-medical costs that officers may incur as a result of their injury. So we really try to make sure our officers are well taken care of, especially if they're hurt in the line of duty.
Great, thank you for that. One more from the audience, from Robbie. This question is in reference to the number of private fireworks during the week before and after the 4th of July. Reading the post-4th of July article in the Broomfield Enterprise, it appeared as if the PD only issued 2 citations and a few warnings. Why did the PD not take a more active stance and issue more citations? And what are the plans for next year to curtail the illegal use of fireworks?
Yeah, great question. So, you know, to be honest with you, we did not anticipate the level of non-compliance with the law that we saw. I don't think any police department did, as you saw. And we're in a weird time, just as a nation with COVID and everything else going on. You know, a lot of people like to go to the Broomfield Fireworks that are held at the Commons. That had to be canceled because of social distancing. But the officers, we did actually have extra officers on for fireworks. And plus a full complement of officers out there answering calls, but they were tied up on higher priority calls. You know, I think we'll have to really look at that and see if we need to put more officers on. I'm really hoping we don't have that level for next year. It also, with the passage of 217, before we had a little bit more freedom to contact people to see what they were doing, and now we have to have a much higher level of proof before we can even contact them. And what we find is a lot of times we would pull onto a street and just, we can tell everybody's outside, we can tell they're shooting off fireworks, but we never see who has actually lit one. And so we would have no what they call reasonable suspicion to make that police related contact unless we saw somebody actually violating the law, which is the actual lighting of the fireworks. So we would try and drive through the neighborhood and discourage it, but it was a different 4th of July for us, that's for sure.
It's been a different period for all of us. I'll go back to Peggy on that. I think Peggy maybe had a question about 217.
I do. How does that legislation change the training and the approach of our police department?
So I would say that 217, the amount of change it puts on any police department is depending on the department. For the Broomfield Police Department, it's not substantial for the most part. We already have body cameras. Much of what you see in the law pertaining to body cameras was actually taken out of our policies. I was at the time president of the Colorado Chiefs Association. A number of senators asked for examples of body worn camera policies, and I think ours in Larimer counties were given to them, and so a lot of it's in there. There are some aspects of the body cameras the body camera part, we will have to make some adjustments, but that doesn't go into effect until 2023. For agencies that don't have body cameras, that's a big change. The use of force definitions changed slightly, and that was kind of interesting. It was effective upon the signature of the governor, but but the training for officers was not required till September 1st. Well, that's kind of a difficult conundrum, because if you're bound by that use of force law effective June 18th, but nobody's training you until September 1st, that's a 90-day window that you don't want to mess with. So we've had to, we decided not to wait on the state. We used our legal department, and we've already done our first training to all of our employees dealing with use of force and some of that kind of stuff. There's a requirement in 217 for data collection. The state really doesn't have a way right now to collect the data that's from all over the state, but we've gone ahead and put in what we believe is the expectations of the legislature, and we are collecting that data now. We'll have to either re-enter it or do something different when the state tells us what it is and what they do and they do not want. But we're pretty close on that. Contacts has been, the term police contact is very vague in 217. So that's where right after 217 on July 4th, we were really pulling back on what we could and could not contact till we got some clarity through on the legislative intent. And now we're pretty much, in fact, we just issued a general order today that really outlines for officers what those contacts are and when they can be made. And it's not that big of a difference now that we've really had an opportunity to look at the state law, look at what we believe is the legislative intent, looking at the constitutional law coming out of the federal government. So we just issued some minor changes on that. Where I think you'll see a big change in service is the other day we had somebody said there's 2 people sitting out in front of my house in a car smoking a cigarette. There's nothing illegal about that. Before, we would just go ahead and contact them and use it as more of a consensual contact. You know, they could drive away. But we don't think that's really something we can do anymore. So what you might see is dispatch will give that call to the officer. The officer may call you and say, what else are you seeing? What about this gives you concern? And if they still can't deliver that or can't develop that reasonable suspicion, they may drive by and see if they can see anything. But in the absence of any of those types of things, we will note the plate on the car if we need it for later, but we will not make contact. And that's kind of a big change in the service level that I think citizens expect out of Broomfield PD. But most times we're able to really clarify that with our citizens. There's a number of other pieces in this legislation. It's 34 pages if you haven't read it. It's the biggest omnibus bill I've ever seen in my work with the legislature. So there's quite a bit in it, but I think all in all, we are going to have to make some equipment purchases to make sure we're in compliance. And most of it's just been policy modifications, which we've been working on actually before the bill even took effect.
There's another thing that passed recently, which was the mask mandate. And there's 2 questions here. What's the difference between a law and a mandate? And the second question is, does this mean we call you if we see people without masks? And I'm pretty sure your answer to that is not that second one, right?
No, not necessarily. So I actually sat on the governor's task force for advising him on COVID-related matters, obviously medical-related matters, mostly compliance matters. So Broomfield's being a county can have a county public health department. That county public health department can issue binding orders upon the citizens. And a week ago, this past Tuesday night, the city and county of Broomfield passed a mandatory indoor wear of masks anytime you're in a public place. The governor had previously said that he was going to leave those decisions to the local governments, but the following day, just because of the uptick in COVID cases, he put a statewide ban in. So the statewide ban applies, it's almost identical to what Broomfield had originally, and it's required anytime you're in a business, you're in a store, you're any place where the public would be, and you're indoors. It doesn't apply to outdoors. So businesses are also required not to allow you entry in to their business unless you're wearing a mask. They're to deny services if you're not wearing a mask, or ask you to leave if you take your mask off once you're inside, unless you're in a restaurant and you're seated eating or drinking food. So we're seeing a high level of compliance. Broomfield's generally pretty compliant, but if somebody is blatantly violating that indoor order, it is law, and it is masks are mandated, so it's mandated in law, and there are public health. There are state statutes that can be enforced for people that violate the public health order. We generally take a compliance approach first and try and warn people and get them to either leave or to go ahead and put their mask on. And we find a high level of people generally comply. We've not really had to take any extraordinary steps to get compliance.
Okay. I'm going to ask you an easy question because then I'm going to ask you a hard question.
Okay.
So what's all that stuff on your belt?
I used a fairly simple belt. You know, the one thing about police chiefs, we can't really do anything, but we can talk about everything. So, but what you'll see on the officers, they'll have their firearm, obviously extra magazines for their firearm. They'll have some kind of intermediate weapon. Some will carry mace, most of them will carry tasers. They usually have tourniquet kits on there, their radios, handcuffs, those kinds of things. You may have noticed that the officers are wearing new uniforms. One of the biggest problems that we see with police officers is the gun belt weighs about 30 pounds. And then, of course, their bulletproof vest on top of that weighs about another 5 to 7 pounds. So they're carrying an awful lot of weight, and they suffer from back problems through their careers. And so we have now using a vest that has their bulletproof vest built into it. And then a lot of that weight from their belt is now distributed and on their shoulders to try and minimize those. Peggy, can you hear me?
You were clipping a little bit, but I heard most of it. Yeah. Can you hear me?
I think we've got a thunderstorm running through north of Broom. I think we have a thunderstorm running through North Broomfield, and it's starting to hit the internet connection here a little bit.
Okay. Well, here comes my hard question, sir. Let's talk about unions. Are the Broomfield Police part of a union? Is there things that you would like us to know about a police union being a good partner to you, and you being the police department, not you, the chief? Uh-oh, have we lost our connection?
Yeah, it looks like Chief Krieger's connection has gone south on us. Why don't we give him a few minutes and see if maybe his service comes back. Actually, his connection has dropped completely. So I would say let's wait a few minutes and see if he'll come back to us. In the meantime, Tina actually asked a question that I think was something that maybe Brian Mason could answer, and I think Brian is still on the line here. Tina says, during this time of so many changes, oh, there's Chief Krieger back. Let's go back to him. Sorry, Brian, we'll come back to you.
I'm sorry, it appears that internet's getting affected by the storms rolling through Broomfield right now. So Peggy, I think your question was about unions, right?
Yeah.
So Broomfield does not have a union. We do not engage in collective bargaining. The officers do belong to what they call the Fraternal Order of Police. They assist the officers with legal defense if they need it. They offer them certain benefits through their association. But it is not it's not a binding discussion. They have no authority. Been pretty useful.
Chief Gary, we've lost you again, and that's really unfortunate. I hope you come back. Gary, is the chief's internet connection gone?
No, he's still connected, but he's clearly having some speed problems there. So why don't we see if he comes back? In the meantime, let me try to unmute Tina and Brian Mason. And Tina, I think you're unmuted. Brian, you may still be muted on your end. Try to unmute. There you go. Tina, can you ask your question of Brian while we're waiting for Chief Krieger to come back?
Maybe. Start reading.
Do you want me to read it? Okay, I think we just lost Tina too. Well, we must have there must be a big storm going on there. Brian, I'm not sure if I understand this, but Tina said during this time of so many changes, does the district attorney's office provide additional assistance and guidance to the new rules and actions for JD 17 counties?
Yeah, great question. So obviously the legislation has had a profound impact on law enforcement, and we do train our officers and our police departments throughout the 17th on lots of things, legal issues specifically. I know that our office has reached out to all of the departments and offered training on the legislation. To date, I believe only one department has taken us up on that.
Okay. Tina, I hope that was what you were looking for. If not, maybe you can send me another chat message. There's Chief Krieger again. Let's give it another try.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry about the internet. It just keeps going in and out. So anyways, Broomfield does not have a union. They don't, I think what's really interesting, and maybe this will help, is when you see these unexcusable events like what happened in the Twin Cities with Mr. Floyd, some of the people that are the biggest critics of those types of things are actually other officers, because they don't understand why that was done, and the simple fact that it occurred makes their job harder, and so they don't want to see those kind of things happening, and they are very angry when that is the way somebody does something like that, and they're portrayed in that same vein. So I find that my FOP representatives are quite useful in helping me with policy decisions, good policy decisions, and almost always we're on the same page. It's not a battle with us.
That's really good to hear. So I just retired from Amazon, and one of the things that we did there is we measured all kinds of stuff. And I'm guessing that in your line of work, you measure all kinds of stuff too. What are the kind of key, we call them key performance indicators. What are those things that are important in a police department?
We measure everything. There's not anything an officer does that we don't have a record of. There's nothing that comes into dispatch we don't have a record of. So we look at things like how many complaints is an officer getting? What was the outcome of those complaints? Is there any theme that goes on with those complaints? How many times does an officer use force? What is the force they're using? Is there anything about that force that they use that we should be concerned about? If you're a police officer in Broomfield and you have to use force, you must use the most minimal amount of force you can to get the person under control. You must then call your supervisor to the scene who will conduct an internal investigation on the force you used. We will capture all the body camera video. All of that goes all the way up through our chain of command through me to make sure that the force that was applied was appropriate and legal under Colorado state law. We measure the number of contacts, who was contacted, what's the demographics of the people that are getting contacted by officer or overall. So we measure about everything, But those are probably be our key indicators. You should know that we get about 5 compliments to every complaint we get overall in the police department. Most of our complaints are relatively minor. Somebody didn't understand something, they didn't like something. We tell people, we'll come in, we'll show you the body camera video and go through your concern with you. We find that about 9 times out of 10 people decline to come in and see it for whatever reason. Major investigations, major allegations of wrongdoing, I would say 80% of them are generated by me and my command staff, not from the outside, but internally. About 50 of those, we find the officer was right, and about 50% of the time, we'll find some level of something wrong. They made a mistake. Most of the time, we can address it with training, some discipline, and sometimes we find that policy was wrong. They did what they were supposed to do, it's just our policy was wrong. So we're constantly reviewing everything our officers do to try and make sure that we are providing the kind of police services you all as citizens of Broomfield want to have.
Oh, that's great. So I don't know if the way you guys did it, but we used to look at those numbers once a month, and it was like 2 hours of grinding through the numbers. And I always got pretty excited about the diversity and inclusion numbers because, well, I was considered diverse. And do you guys have the same kind of diversity and inclusion rules where you're trying to recruit a certain number of women or people of color? Or do you guys have those kinds of goals like software people do?
We do. One of the problems, and it's an unintended consequence of events like have occurred in the last month, is it actually drives people out of wanting to go into policing. So what we find, and we have found over about the last 5 to 6 years, is that before we'd advertise for a position in Broomfield, we get 300 applicants. Now we may get 20 or 25, and we'll only get 2 out of those. So and that makes your diversity pool become even more
narrow.
constricted.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But we do watch our numbers. I will tell you that our numbers of officers and actually overall employees, for women, we're about 30% women, which is actually pretty high for a policing profession. And then for ethnic and racial diversity, we'd be equivalent to what you would see in the community.
That's great. Do you also have goals around language spoken and that there's Spanish speaking or whatever? Do you guys have goals like that too?
We do. We actually have officers that speak a multitude of different languages. So we actually give bonuses at the end of the year for officers that are bilingual or multilingual, and because that really helps us there. We also have a language line. So if we have somebody speaks a language that is not common, Mandarin Chinese, for example, we can connect to the language line, which has interpreters that can do that go-between for us. Now, when we have major case investigations where the interpreter has to be certified because they're going to come to testify in court, we also have contracts with people that can do that as well. So we have quite a array of ways that we can communicate with people, but we do have officers, obviously Spanish being the highest number that we have, but we have ones that speak Korean, we have one that speaks Russian, we have a number of different ones.
That's great to hear. Okay, little topic change, here we go. What crimes do you hate having to arrest or cite people for? And conversely, what do you think is an underreported problem in Broomfield today?
Oh boy. We don't make the law. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking the police make the law. We don't. The legislature or the elected officials make the laws. Sometimes it's not the law itself, but sometimes you get circumstances that by the letter of the law, we have to arrest, but by the circumstances, we wish we had more leeway. So domestic violence is a prime example. Under the Violence Against Women's Act, we have to arrest the primary aggressor. We have no choice. We must do that. But we'll sometimes get into a household and they live their lives in some kind of anger and a little bit of pushing and shoving, and it's just the way it goes. And yet we'll have to make an arrest on those. So sometimes there are situations where we don't have the discretion, but for the most part, we try our best to be fair in our application of the law, and so it's really hard. I mean, when the legislature has decided that something is legal, we do have a certain amount of discretion for unusual circumstances, but they have an expectation we're going to enforce the law whether we agree with it or not. And I always tell people it doesn't matter if you agree with the law or not. That's not our job. We're law enforcement. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Great. Gary Koenig, do you have some questions from the chat room?
Yeah, so one question that I'm curious about has to do with automation and technology. Are there things going on in police work across the country in terms of automation and technology that you don't feel like you're able to keep up with, either for budgetary reasons or whatever? So I guess, is there automation you wish you had that you don't have?
Boy, Gary, the Broomfield City Council and the City Manager's Office are very committed to making sure the police department stays on top of technology. So to give you an example, a brand new patrol car, the technology in the car is actually more expensive than the car itself is.
Okay.
And that's just how much technology in there. So we have laptop computers, we have license plate readers, we have scanners in the car. Of course, we have body cameras. One of the things that we are looking at with our body camera program is under 217, if an officer fails to turn on their body camera and it's not because of malfunction or something, there's a presumptive inference that the officer's testimony that would have been captured or was about what captured is not credible. Now that's probably got to be challenged in court because there's no such thing as a presumptive inference like that. But I think what the key here is you've got to have the officers get those body cameras on them, but they are human. What I don't want to have happen is when you have an officer where their choice is defend themselves and protect their lives or turn their body camera on. They can only do one, and it happens so fast. So we're looking at some technology that'll automatically turn on not only their camera, but every camera within, say, 100 feet of that area. So we capture all different angles of any critical incident that occurs with an officer, whether it be through their taser or their handgun or anything else. So we've been pretty fortunate. We have drones available to us. We have certified drone pilots. We don't fly them every day. We fly them when we have a critical incident where we need that overhead view, like a barricaded gunman or something like that. So we're very well equipped. There's always something that you can probably come up with, but as a police department as a whole, we're very well equipped.
Well, sort of along those same lines, what about heavy weaponry? We see some controversy in larger cities, especially, that some police departments almost seem to have military grade, tanks and whatnot. Is that something we have or that we need, or is everything good there?
So we have no military grade weapons. Every weapon the officers have can be purchased over the counter by any citizen. We do have AR-15 rifles. They are used sparingly, but they're used in a situation where a handgun, the accuracy of the officer because of distances could be compromised with a handgun, and we're responsible for every round we fire. So the more accurate we can be, the more likely we are to only impact our intended target and not miss and hit somebody that we don't intend to. We don't have any tanks. We do have a SWAT vehicle. It has no armaments on it whatsoever. It's the equivalent of a armored car that would take money back and forth to a bank. It helps us to get our SWAT team close to places where somebody might be shooting at us, because we're going to try and get not only our SWAT team close to them, but also our negotiators sit in it. It also is very helpful if we were to have some kind of situation where we needed to rescue somebody. It's bulletproof, so we can drive it right up and provide cover to whether it be paramedics or the officers to rescue somebody. But in and of itself, it's just a big metal truck. It can't do anything other than drive it.
Yeah. If it comes to very specialized needs, and I certainly hope we never need, like, say, bomb disposal, but if we needed something like that, are there agreements with other agencies nearby that could provide those kind of things?
Sure. So bomb disposal is one unit we do not have. It takes a huge amount of equipment and training, and we just don't use it often enough. So we have an agreement with Adams County Sheriff to bring their bomb disposal unit in. We could also call Jefferson County if we needed to and have them do it. So, so yes, we do have those agreements where we don't either have the expertise or the equipment, or it just doesn't financially make sense for us to have it. We do train our dogs in bomb detection. So if you have, one of the presidential candidates are going to be at the First Bank Center, we will have our dogs sweep the inside of the center for any kind of explosive devices, along with Secret Service. And we'll actually call other, because it's so large, we'll call other surrounding police departments with similar trained dogs. So we have a lot of agreements in place to be able to get the assistance we need.
Cool. Well, these are two very special interest questions. I'm a motorcyclist and a bicyclist. How many motorcycle patrolmen do you have? And do we have any bicycle patrolmen? I'm not sure I've seen any.
So we have 8 full-time motorcycle officers. They're assigned to traffic. We actually have a large traffic unit for a department our size, but it's because we have the 5 major highways and a lot of roadways in Broomfield. Bicycle, we own probably about, maybe 6 to 8 bikes. Some of them are electric assist bikes. And we put those out in the summertime with patrol officers, actually are specially trained to ride them. And they tend to be out more in the evenings with them, so they can ride in the parks when people are in the parks and stuff like that. But yes, we have both of those things.
Cool. Well, I think we're coming up to our time limit here. So Peggy, what do you have for wrap up? Thank you very much, Chief, for being with us. This has been incredibly informative, and I'm sure our participants have enjoyed this greatly.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I've really enjoyed speaking with everybody and talking about the police department.
Well, you get the last word, sir. You've got 2 minutes. What is the sort of thing you want us to most take away from our conversation tonight? The thing that's really important for us to know from your perspective?
Well, I hope that through our conversations and what you have learned in other venues, that the Broomfield Police Department is unique in and of itself, and hopefully is not typical to what you've seen of some of those other police departments. I certainly hope not. We certainly strive not to be that way. And we are truly committed to being a partner with all of you and everybody in Broomfield to providing the kind of police services you want, because after all, you're the people that pay for this, and you should have the kind of police services that you're proud of and what you want. And we really try hard to do that. And anytime you have a concern or you have a question, that's what me and my command staff are there for, is to try and get you those answers if we can.
Thank you so much. And I'm really glad that you gave up your dinner for us. And I think that I'm going to call our first Broomfield Conversation a wild success due to you. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it so much. Everybody have a great evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.